Okay, it's good to see everybody made it out in the beautiful weather today to come to Destrehan. So I've given this presentation several times, and since we have about 30-40 minutes, I'm going to go through the slides rather quickly. A lot of this will be stuff that you might be familiar with, but just kind of as an overview of the history of the German coast. As you know, in 21, we celebrated our tricentennial, our 300th anniversary, and some of us, I see Lillian is here today, we even went to our homeland and had a wonderful visit, but we had to wait till 22 to do that because of the COVID pandemic. So does anybody recognize these names? Some of those names? These are some of the most common surnames of our ancestors that settled the German coast. These are the ones who left the largest family and the most descendants. And if you would be playing German coast bingo, I think you could probably have all of those names on your family tree and be satisfied. Something. Well, this was supposed to be the map of Europe, but it looks like we're having a technical thing here. Okay. All right, now we're cooking with grease. Okay, so these names come from Europe, and the area that they would have come from falls within this red box. So when people say we're German, we're from, our last name Schexnayder, Hebel, Rom, or German, I always tell the people that actually we were Germanic, because this is a current map of those countries. In the 1720s, when our ancestors left, this is what the map actually would have looked like. So do you see Germany there? No. You see France? No. All right, to get your bearings, here's the Rhine River. So this to the left is France, this to the right is Germany, this corner down here is Switzerland. But you see all these various kingdoms, principalities, dukedoms. These are all part of the old Holy Roman Empire, okay? And Lothringen in blue, this is Lorraine, okay? Alsace, Strasbourg is here. This is Alsace in this area. So this is giving you the idea that the people were not Germans, they were Germanic, okay? And if you go to Alsace in France today, okay, do not call Alsatian people Germans, okay? And they're Alsatian, and the language they speak is Alsatian. Now, what happens is in Europe, the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire all stems from this 30 years war back in the early 1600s. So this was a full century before our ancestors left, but this war's impacts over the region caused a lot of problems that lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years. Devastation, famine, disease, bankruptcy, and depopulation. In fact, the King of France, this area was so vacated of people, they were begging people to come out from Switzerland and to come and relocate, giving people land to form an Alsace area. Now, much closer to our ancestors' departure was a very cold winter in 1708-09, which caused lots of crop failures in the wheat. And of course, wheat was used to make bread, and bread was their main sustenance in those days. So there's lots of these type of reasons why our ancestors left. Was it for religious reasons? You go to school, they tell you the Pilgrims, everything about American history, the Pilgrims. The Pilgrims came for religious freedom, okay? And that's kind of indoctrinated that America started because of the Pilgrims. But our ancestors, of course, we had nothing to do with the Pilgrims in New England. Did they come for religious reasons? Well, this is a map. This is showing the predominant religions of this part of Europe at the time. So this chartreuse yellow color is solid Catholic. And then the area in purple is predominantly Catholic with some Protestants, okay? Then your orange is Lutheran. Then the pink is Calvinist and Lutheran together. Tan is Calvinist and yellow, okay? So you can see there was not one area that was really solid in this central part, because this is where our ancestors came from, this part right here. This is France, Austria to the right, Netherlands up here, you can see. If a king or prince or duke switched from one religion as they converted to Protestantism, then the people who lived in the area often had to switch because the church was the only church in the village, okay? There were some places in Alsace, in Germany, they had one church and they used it for both religions. They'd have 2 masses on the same weekend in the same building. So they start recruiting people to come to Louisiana. This is a copy of the flyers and the posters that would have been put on church doors advertising Louisiana. These pamphlets begin to circulate in the 1720s. They advertised Louisiana as a place full of gold, silver, copper, and lead mines, which was so abundant you could just scoop the gold off the ground. Sounds nice, huh? They also advertise for rich soil for the crops. Now that part we can agree with because of course we're right along the river and we know that Louisiana has very fertile soil. There's lots of herbs and plants that can be used for medicinal purposes, curing all of your illnesses. And then Native Americans would be very willing to show you how to use such medicines. That part may not be true. So what happens is quickly people start leaving Alsace, this area, and the port of debarkation is going to be Lorient. So the Company of the Indies is based there, and this is where the people have to go. If you walked, you could use this on Google Maps when you get directions. Instead of using your car, you can see walking. If you ever curious how long it's going to take to walk somewhere from Strasbourg to Lorient, 189 hours it would take you. 918 kilometers, okay, to walk all the way across France. So that would take a month if you were walking a couple of hours a day, maybe 6 weeks to walk across, okay? Now, because nobody here knows about kilometers and you can't visualize France, geography, I put this red dot right kind of over the river parishes here, okay? 918 kilometers is 570 miles. So that would be like us leaving this library and walking to Matamoros on the border of Texas, Abilene, Texas, Oklahoma City, St. Louis. Would you like to go to Evansville, Indiana, Knoxville, Augusta, Georgia, past Jacksonville, Orlando, Tampa, Sarasota? So that's how far, that's the equivalent of how far they had to actually walk to get to Lorient. Now they arrive at the port of Lorient and there's about 4,000 people there. Do you think the town of Lorient is prepared for these 4,000 people? There's no place for them to stay. They have no food. So of course, people are getting very hungry. Disease breaks out. They're sick. They've been walking for months and months and months. And the conditions, where they're going to go to the bathroom, that kind of thing makes the situation even worse. Does this sound familiar? With current events of today, people walking to the border from all across South America and Central America, our ancestors did the same thing 300 years ago, okay? So the disease, hundreds and hundreds of these people died. For some people, they said, you know what, it's not worth it. They turned around and went back. Or they walked to some other part of France that they never came, okay, out of these 4,000. Because so many of them died, there's actually going to be a mass grave where they're just dumping the bodies in the ground, okay? Eventually the ships, there was one ship or a few ships that came a little earlier. La Marie came before in 1718, but for the most part, these are the ships that are recognized as those that our ancestors came on. You can make probably a movie on each one of these. Some of them were stopped by pirates when they had to go to, most of them had to refuel at Saint-Domingue to get supplies and before they can make it here. And of course, not to mention the storms they went through. But they come to Louisiana, and of course at first we know they end up in, of these 4,000 recruits, only about 1,000 of them actually board the ships, those ships that were just mentioned, out of the 4,000 people. Right away, so of course several of them, probably about half, or not about half, about a quarter die on the boats. And then 500 die by the time they get to Old Biloxi, which is Ocean Springs today, and that's where they actually land. They said they were so hungry that they found clams in the sand on the beach, and of course they just hurried and ate everything. Of course, then that killed them because the clams had been spoiled. So only about, of all of the 4,000 people that show up in France to leave, only 300 actually survived to establish in Louisiana. Now, they don't stay at Biloxi long because of John Law. He had the monopoly as the director of the company in the Indies. He had actually got a guy by the name of Jean-Pierre Parish, who is Swiss, to recruit these Germanic people, these Germans, these Swiss, to come to Louisiana. Eventually, Parish falls out with John Law, and he actually does the same thing in South Carolina. And there's a town, I found out, Perryburg or Perryville or something like that, where he ended up bringing people. But John Law's idea is to put the people on his land. And John Law's land is 24,000 acres, but it's in Arkansas. Okay? So if you look at the current map of Arkansas today, the Mississippi River is the eastern boundary of the state of Arkansas. The Arkansas River forks off and goes to the northwest. Right at the juncture of these two rivers, the Mississippi and the Arkansas, is where his concession is. That's later be known as the Arkansas Post. Okay? And some of our ancestors, French people that came from Quebec, did settle there, and there was a lot of connection back and forth between the Arkansas Post and in particular St. Charles Parish. But the Germans, John Law is bankrupt by December of 1720, okay? They said by June, about 50 German and French families go up to settle in Arkansas, and it takes them 2 months to get there, but then they find out once they get there, about a month later, La Boulay, who's going to be the commandant of the Arkansas Post, says, well, John Law is bankrupt, all of this is falling apart. Now, there are some people that argue that the German coast settlers never even went to Arkansas, that they never even made it up there, that they just stayed in Biloxi and eventually came straight here. So there's two arguments on that. But the point is, by October 1721, this Arkansas concession, the whole plan is abandoned. They're going to resettle by December 1721 on the Delaire concession. So Kelowna and Taft, where we know today, was the Delaire concession. The Delaires were two French brothers who received their concession. When you got land from the king, when you received the concession, you had to settle that land, you had to clear it, you had to make improvements, hearth and home. You had to prove that you were going to. These brothers never did that. They received the concession and they never settled. Okay? Part of that land had already been cleared by Native Americans anyway. Probably an earlier village had been established there by Native Americans. The Delaires do not take any settlement there. Oh, and by the way, these are some photos I took of the Arkansas Post. I went there several years ago. So it's a public, in the Civil War, they used this area for a camp. But anyway, if you want to go, it's open to the public. So, okay, the Delaire concession. Here's a historical map. Here's Google Maps. So this is the area we're talking about, the German coast. We're across the river down here, right off the screen, but this is where we're going to be settling. Who's in charge now at the German coast? Who's going to be our first commandant? Charles Frederick Darensberg. He was born in Stockholm, in Sweden, but he was not Swedish. He was of Germanic background. His parents were ethnic Germans, but that's where he was actually born, but he eventually serves in the Swedish army. And he would later take into the service of John Law's company. He was commissioned in January of 19th, 1721, so tomorrow would be the day that he was commissioned, and he arrives in June, and he came via Biloxi on the Portefeuille, which was one of those ships mentioned. And he establishes his property just on the upriver side of the village, and it's named Karlstein. For Charles in German, of course, is Karlstein. He marries Marguerite Metzer. He has 6 children, thousands of descendants, and he would end up serving as our commandant of the German coast for 47 years. And I do believe he was well liked, because in the sacramental records that survived, the one book that survived the fire at the Red Church, he was the witness pretty much at every wedding, and he was often parent to a lot of the children. So I guess either he was forcing himself, or they liked him and they asked him to do so. Probably he had the most money in the village, so they wanted him as the parent.
Exactly, is Karlstein?
Karlstein is going to be on with us today, Kelowna. There's a kind of like a trailer park there right before you get to the crevasse, and that's where his property was. Okay, now this map was done by my late boss, Norman Normion. Many of you knew Norman as well. This was done in the 80s and the 90s when computers, graphics was coming out. Norman was eager, and he did this with research that was available at the time. So it shows that there was a bayou that came off, and one of the villages was here, one here, Karlstein was here, Hoffen was over here. Unfortunately, at the time that this was done, the research, the information they had available was wrong. So many people like to use this, and they constantly reuse it and reuse it, sometimes even with or without permission, but anyhow, it's circulated so much, but really it's inaccurate. So if you want to see where we're talking about for these various villages, there was four settlements. Here's the Mississippi. So Waterford nuclear plant is here. This is Taft. Okay, the Enelia crevasse is over here. Here's the mouth of the spillway. So this is Muntz on the east bank. This is River Road, 3127, and this is 3141. Mary Plantation Road. Here's the prison. Okay, so the four villages were Hoffen, which was closest to the river, where the green star is. Halfway where the train tracks pass is Marienthal. In German, that means Mary Valley. Marien is Mary, Tal is Valley. So there was a settlement there with 82 people. Augsburg was further back, basically where the prison is, and then Karlstein was up here on this end. These are the populations given. Why they showed his as only one person when he had a wife and kids, I'm not quite sure. Okay, but this is the breakdown. So the total population by the German Coast Census of 1722, 247 people. So already within that first year, they start with 300. Over 50 people have died within the first year. Okay, so these are harsh conditions. There's no slaves, no cattle or horses. And welcome to Louisiana. September 12th, that first year, 1722, there's a hurricane. So Marienthal and Augsburg, these two settlements are flooded. Why? Today we know about backwater flooding from hurricanes. So they're building levees behind us in Destrehan. St. John is building levees. Okay. On the west bank, you have the lake down here, and all that water was pushed, and these flooded. So what do? They say, okay, let's get out of here. So they resettle everybody along the river. They realize the highest ground is the river's edge. Okay, so the population by 1724 is down to 169. So the flood has really decimated these people. 13 families left. They went to Bienville's land, which is today would be the city of New Orleans, like the CBD area where the bridge is. Okay, and then most of them moved to Hoffen, but they've lost more people. Okay, but they are able to get some agricultural surplus, which is going to be starting to go down to New Orleans. And by the 1730s, they're really dependent on the city for the German coast. Produce, meat, grains, vegetables, those sorts of things. This is going to show you, I'm not going to name them all, but here's all the places where the 65 families were listed as being. So do we see Germany? No. Do we see France? No. So these are all the various kingdoms and places. Sometimes they would list their dioceses. Okay, the island of Osel, that was Darensburg. Osel is an island that's in Estonia. The Baltic Sea belongs to Estonia today, but at the time belonged to Sweden, and he was stationed there before he came. Now, there's when we show the religions, here's the religious breakdown. The majority of the families were Catholic, about 80%, okay? On Bienville's land, at the same time, those who had left the coast and went to what is today New Orleans, there's 13 families. But those did not list their religion if they were not Catholic. Because remember, in those times, under the Côte Noire in Louisiana, to own slaves, you had to be a Catholic. So being in the city and closer to New Orleans, I guess they didn't want to reveal that they were Protestant. Eventually, of course, the Protestant families all became Catholic within time. But these are where they are from. 1726 census. Now, for the first time, we're going to see there's 4 people enslaved on the German coast, but the population is still quite meager at 156. But by this point, the ones who went to New Orleans are coming back. They're coming back to the German coast. So 1731, the population of 267 people is showing also 18 hired workers, but now 120 people who are enslaved here. Okay? So with this population increase and with the enslaved workforce, the produce is in the production of vegetables and crops and so forth is going to start to augment. Also, which was important, was 1728. There was a cancellation of all of the unimproved concessions, like the Delaire brothers, who never settled on their property. A lot of this land was given, and then nobody ever settled there. So the government says, by this point, we're going to give all these German people, these hardworking people, all that land that nobody ever. And so now, by the 1728, they're owning their own land. 3 families even moved to the East Bank. Okay, Ambrose Heidel, Gaspard Troupes, and Nicolas Vigner are the 3 that venture off to the East Bank to the New Star Peace side. So by this point, by 1730, the West Bank settlement stretches about 12 miles, 53 farms, 200 inhabitants, and the East Bank is about 7 miles, 15 farms, 67 inhabitants. Okay, as I said, this is kind of the modern day map of the Côte des Allemands, the German coast. So it stretched from the Parish line on the West Bank all the way to Barton Drive in Luling, from where we are at the library up to Monts. Okay, so we know today there is a town on Highway 90 called Des Allemands, Bayou des Allemands, Lake des Allemands. Our ancestors did not live in that town. There's a lot of people who begin their genealogy research and they see Des Allemands, so they think that's where everybody lived over there on Highway 90. Yeah. Nobody was living over there at the time. They were all here on the river. So this is the Côte des Allemands when you want to visualize geographically where it was. So by 1737, this census gave very little information, just basically there was 450 people here. As you can see, the enslaved population has grown. 1748, there's some friction with the Native Americans. People identified as Choctaw raid the area. The Cheval family, Cheval, was severely impacted. 2 of them were killed. They were scalped. They had all daughters, so the surname does not come down today. It was a minor infringement, but it instilled a lot of fear in the people that were living here. And so a lot of the families in that area, which was on this side of the river, would move to New Orleans. But we did see a reinforcement of population in the 1750s. There's a boat that brings over 47 families from Alsace, the Caméléon. These were Lutheran people of a Lutheran or religious background. These are the families and the spouses and with their children. So Bernard, Conrad, Heyer becomes Hayes. Jacob is a huge family. The Sheffers, a lot of them had daughters, so they didn't. The names don't come down in the Volion family. These people were leaving France in the 1750s because they heard about an island called Sylvania, and they were trying to go there in America. The island of Sylvania, but come to find out, it was Pennsylvania. And so they were leaving France in the Alsace area, and they were stopped because the king was afraid of depopulation. The king did not want his citizens to leave, and he had passed a law saying you had to have a passport to leave the country. They had no clue about the law, and they didn't know what a passport was. So they are arrested and put in prison, and they brought to Metz in France. In the town of Metz, there is going to be a trial. So basically, say the men are going to be put on ships, galley ships, and basically work as slaves, and the women are going to be, and kids are going to be left behind. But if you switch to the Catholic religion, we'll let you go to Louisiana. Guess what they did? They became Catholic. And these families come to Louisiana. Now, by this point, they're going to settle most of them on the second German coast, which would later become St. John the Baptist Parish. Okay? Now, these additional Alsatians are very hardworking people. They mix well with the established population along the river. So the governor, the French governor at the time, Killerick, is very pleased. So in 1756, he gets 30 more people come. In 1759, more relatives come of the initial people. And had the Treaty of Paris not taken place, and then we get switched over to Spanish in 1763, I think there would have been a much larger influx of these Alsatians coming to the area. But with the Treaty of Paris, that all comes to the end. There's no more French rule. The Spanish are in charge. It takes a few years. They do their first census in 1766. The population has really boomed now. So you're starting to see grandkids of the first settlers popping up. Over 1,200 inhabitants. You can see the breakdown. Most of it was on the West Bank still. But look at the St. Charles and St. John. There's 120 farms in St. Charles, by this time 66 in St. John. There's also 535 enslaved on this census. 60% of the farms, though, do not own a slave. They cannot afford a slave. But those who do have slaves, they average about 7 slaves per farm of those that have slaves. The livestock is also listed as well. 1768, they call it a revolution. I don't know if that's really a good term to call it, but Ulloa was a Spanish governor, and the Germans get involved with this because what happens is the Spanish want you to only trade with other Spanish colonies, okay? And these people were sending stuff to the American colonies and the French islands. Not necessarily their produce, because that was sent to New Orleans. What they were also doing was harvesting cypress lumber in the swamps behind their properties. Okay, and the milled cypress timber is being shipped to the islands, which are used to build houses. And that was a big source of income from our German coast people. So when the Spanish say you can't export this timber to these French islands that they used, that was a big source of loss of income for these people. Okay, so Ulloa was an unfavorable governor, so these people are really upset with him. Then the Acadians arrive. Okay, the Acadians, as we well know, by the 1760s, when they get here, have been through the ringer. They are destitute. They have nothing but the clothes on their back. They are starving. So the governor confiscates the rice grown by the German families to feed the Acadians. Now, many of us here are descendant both of German coast settlers and Acadian settlers. Okay, so you can see the story from both sides. Your ancestors are starving to death. They need food, but then you can also see, well, these people work very hard to grow that rice, and that money is used to support them to make their living. What side you on? Pick a side, huh? So, same thing today. Nothing new under the sun. Who you feel sorry for? Now, there's also personal connections with, Darrensburg's kids and grandkids start marrying into the really influential French families, like the Attorney General, Chauvin de la Frenière. Another granddaughter of Darrensburg had married Joseph Villeray, who by this time is the captain of our militia. So Villeray was arrested, and eventually they were executed. There were 7 people that were executed. Darrensburg is saved because he was old. They felt sorry for him. O'Reilly comes in to put order into Louisiana. and he's the one who orders these executions. It's ironic that they were against the Spanish, because during that period, the German coast really prospered the most over time, and that was mostly because of the increase of slaves. O'Reilly's also were responsible in December of 1769 by resettling some families who were in Maryland to come to Louisiana. The most significant for the river parishes is the Ori family. But there are several families in Baton Rouge, Highland Road, the Deutsch Highlands, the German Highlands, like the Klein Peters, the Sharps, the Thomases. Some of those families are big in Baton Rouge, but O'Reilly is the one who's responsible for that. He also, in February of 1770, establishes a second church on the German coast, this time at Edgard, which is later known as St. John the Baptist. Okay, so here's the census of 1769. There's over 2,000 people. The livestock, the economic output, rice, corn, beans, indigo, tobacco, cotton, and the cypress timbers. No sugar cane yet. It's too early. 1776, the population is 1,800. 1785, over 3,200. Each census, they would list things differently, but this is the first time, 1785, look at this, 1,800 slaves, 1,300 whites, free people of color, and mulattoes who are all clumped together. So for the first time by the 1780s, the enslaved population has now overtaken the original white population, okay? So this is just a recap to show over the years from 1720, the first 60 years or so, how the population grew from 200 to over 3,200 people. But look at the slave population. That's where it's growing the most here. So one of the reasons that the slave population grows is because we have forced heirship in Louisiana. If this is your piece of land, okay, say that, our land is all of these chairs, okay? All right, so if you have one kid gets this row and all this land, the other kid gets this row and this land, so over time it's harder to divide land. And then if this row has 10 kids, then you got to take each one of these pieces of land. So it's hard. You can sell the land and divide the money, because money is easier to divide than land. So by the 1780s, and then 1790s, and into the 19th century, the families are leaving the German coast. They're moving because they have too many kids. And that having lots of kids is a sign of stability and prosperity. 1810, this is the first federal census. During the pandemic, I analyzed in a spreadsheet, I did some digging. I went through all 47,000 entries of the 1810 census for the entire state of Louisiana. So I did this for every single parish, even the ones in North Louisiana. But you can see by this time, the German coast, the original settlers, those orange names I showed you on the first slide, St. Charles Parish only make up 7% of the population. The enslaved 71% of the people in St. Charles Parish by 1810 were slaves. Okay? In St. John Parish, it was a lot less. It was 50-50. About half the people in St. John were enslaved. The original descendants of the German coast was about a quarter of the population. So upriver, we saw a slightly larger German coast presence, but you can see there's very few Acadians here. The Acadians are all upriver. People of Anglo-American background, Germans who came later, not associated with us by the 1800s, some Spanish, Isleño, Italian, there was even Italians here early. Free people of color, okay, about 4%, about 3% in St. John, okay. The population of both parishes combined by 1810, 6,300 people. A lot of the people have left. Where did they go? This is a breakdown in 1810. These are all now the map didn't look like this yet because some of the parishes in the west were still big and they didn't subdivide. But I put the parishes where they moved to that are current day places. So you can see our ancestors spread to several parishes. Attakapaw was all of this area here, but mostly they were in Vermilion Parish. Some went to Natchitoches, a lot to St. Landry, upriver, and so forth, downriver as well. The most common name on the 1810 census of our German Coast families, 85 people had the Schexnayder surname, and this is an asterisk next to that, because as you well know, the 1810 census didn't list every person in the household, it just listed the head. So we have to make the assumption that everybody in the household had the same surname, which is statistically inaccurate, but there was 11 households under Schexnayder. Those are the parishes that they were located in. So Frederick and Email were tied for number 2. Email had more households, but they had the same number of people who had that in those households as the Fredericks. Then you can see the others: Webers, Vickners, Heidels, Treg, False, Rome, Trosclair, Troxler, and all the various spellings, Wagespack and Meyer, Calm, Oobs, Zerain, Balsam, Becknell, Lesch, Matern, Tubes, Wiltz, Ori, Stelly, Labranche, Wimpren, Luke, Darensberg, Muntz, Kern, Jacob, Kindler, Marks, Trish, Schoff, Edelmeyer, Cotlevin, Rixner, Steiger, Elfer, Heltz, Hingel, Bernard, Schwest, Lagman, Perkel, Strantz, Brady, Keller, Achman, Onglot, Grabert, Pischoff, Touche, and Walters. So these are the surnames that are associated with the old German coast found in our census of 1810. So this is just to give you a recap. First German coast, second German coast, the Acadians come in, that's St. James, Ascension, Iberville. Where did the people go first when they left the German coast? They just went up the river into the Acadian coast, and they start intermarrying already with those Acadian families as they go up river. A lot of the people also left through these bayous. On the east bank, Bayou La Branche, Dutch Bayou, Bayou des Acadiens, they go through here, and they settle along the Amite River. Okay, they call this the Côte Française, the French coast, French settlement today. But where were the people from? Idale. These are the families that go and settle. The original French settlement community is settled by these families: Idale, Vickner, Matern, Pochet, Schexnayder, and Vickner. All of those from our German coast. Pochet came from France, but he settled very early with our ancestors. Then you see a reinforcement from the second German coast, from the St. John area, of the Vickners, the Berthelot's, Brignacs, Fontenot's, and Lobels. These are families who had left Alabama after the Treaty of Paris in 1763. They come to the German coast, then they start going into the swamps too. People also leave the river and they go to the bayous. Okay, so here we have Lake des Allemands. They can go through the waterways into the lake. From there, they can go along the Spanish Trail, that high ridge. So now they're going to start settling along Bayou des Allemands, Vacherie Falls as it's known, which is back Vacherie. They go into Bayou Buff, Chack Bay, and Kramer, settling along those ridges of the swamps. Okay? Then you see a further migration through the Chemin Militaire, which goes through behind Vacherie, overland. And then a lot of the families from St. John take this and settle along Bayou Lafourche, where Acadians, in red is Acadian, upper Bayou Lafourche. But they settle what is between Labourdyville and Thibodaux. Okay, that area today is called St. John Community. A lot of the people came from St. John Parish. What we call St. Charles Community between Thibodaux and Raceland, you see a reinforcement of the people that are leaving St. Charles Parish, like the Wagespax, Toups, Champagne, Baudouin. All the families just went right across and made like a third German coast on the bayou. Okay, some people went downriver on Bas du Fleuve, so they go into the Jefferson Parish area, like Wagaman, Ama, Bridge City. All those communities would not have existed at the time. That was all farms along the river, and the people like the Trosclairs, the Freeloos, the Rangs, we know Schexnayders moved downriver as well. Some of them went really downriver into Plaquemines, like the Schexnayders, the Becknells, the Fredericks. They go really far down the river into Plaquemines Parish. They moved to the prairies and the bayous of the west. So, okay, this is Bayou Teche. Okay, the pre-established Creoles are down here. Some Spanish are here around New Iberia. The Acadians are through St. Martin Parish, around the prairies of Lafayette. The German people settled around Opelousas in this area and along lower Bayou Vermilion, okay, which is Abbeville today. So like there's Schexnayders, Touches, Toups. All these same families are going out to the west, okay? Opelousas and Bayou Vermilion are initially settled by a lot of people from the German coast. So if you see the antebellum distribution of all the families, all these areas were populated by people who left our German coast early on. To give you a case study before we wrap up, Ambrose Hydell is our progenitor ancestor, born in 1702. He marries in Louisiana in 1721 to Marguerite Schaff. Okay, his brother dies, his siblings die, his mom comes, but she eventually dies too. So he's kind of by himself. He gets married. He and his wife have 9 children. And these are the ones that I was able to document, because we know the church records are gone, so the number is actually larger, but statistically we know they have more kids, but the church records being lost. These are the ones that are documented. 70 grandchildren, 317 great-grandchildren, and then 865 great-great-grandchildren. That's one couple. So that's the Hydells. I could do the same thing with the Webbers, the Treggs, the Romes, the Schexneiders, and you'll see they proliferate. Now, by going down this 5 generations down, only 54 of the 865 great-great-grandchildren, 6% are males who carry the surname Hydell. In New Orleans, they say Haydell, which is like nails on the chalkboard for me. So they married to 246 different surnames in 5 generations. But look at this, 73% were French. So why do our German coast ancestors who were Germanic people speak French? The children speak the language of the mother, okay? So they are marrying into these French families. 1803, when Laussat came through here, Clément Laussat, the French prefect, they said by 1803 you could find no one in this area speaking German anymore. So these are some of the surnames that you start seeing the family marry into, the grandkids, then the great-grandkids. Okay, so you can see a lot of French names embedded through there. Most of the surnames, as we know, are Gallicized. Heidel becomes Heidel's, Draeger, Treg, Foltz, False. Achman was Oatman, Ub. Touché was actually Czech. They were from what is today Czech Republic, or Czechia, as they now call themselves. Rome. I believe this was the original of Schexnayder, but not proven yet. Wagespack was Wagensbach, Toops was Dupes. Wigner, we know the W in German, of course, is pronounced like a V. The Edelmeyers is one of the odd ones. You know, it was Edelmeyer, then some of the records you'll see the transposing of the consonants. So instead of Edelmeyer, it becomes Eldemeyer. Eldemeyer becomes Eldemer. Mayer in French. So it becomes Le Maire. In Louisiana French, linguists have studied our French in Louisiana. There's something that people do here, or did for 300 years, where they transpose consonants. So an example, if you ever heard somebody say plurine, yeah, y'all know the ones who really know. Instead of praline, they would say plurine. What are they doing? The R and the L are transposed. So like fourmi and frumi for an ant. Okay, frumi and frumi. They're taking the consonants. So some of our words in Louisiana are switched, and that's what's happened with this surname. Okay, Schexnayder was the same thing. They put the sh sound to the front. Zeischneider, Zeischneider, Schexnayder. So they moved the GS to the front part of the name. So that's what happened in French. And of course, we know the story of the Quatrevins, who were Otzinger. Something that sounded like the number 80 was the origins of the surname, so they just said number 80, Quatrevins, the surname now. Then you have the D name, this concept of the Quebec families, like everybody in Louisiana who has the last name of Terrebonne. Have you ever met somebody with the last name of Terrebonne, like the Parish? They should be a Dupré, because it was Dupré de Terrebonne. Dupré of the good land, okay? So Baumgartner, Abraham Baumgartner, there's no Baumgartners left, they became Poncare, or Poncare. So some of the books that, our German coast, this was published by our society, out of print, you can't get it. Probably the best book written about our ancestors was by Reinhard Kondert. This one here, The Germans of Colonial Louisiana, out of print. Of course, for genealogy, Al's 2 books of the German Coast families, volume 1 and 2, which are still available. This is a good picture book of St. Charles Parish. The bicentennial was in 2007. I think they might have a few left, I'm not sure. Deiler's book on the German coast, 1 star. This has been reprinted by Amazon. He made a lot of assumptions. He was a professor at Tulane, but he didn't look at primary sources. He was into music. He was theatrical. I think he liked to embellish. And so he made up the story of 6 Schneider brothers. So they became the Scheck Schneiders. I mean, it's full of garbage in there. Some of it's good information, but you have to read it with the idea that he has a lot of mistakes. Now, this book is available like on bookshop.org and maybe sometimes on Amazon. Reinhard Kondert. This one is out of print. You cannot get, but pretty much most of the information from this book he put in here, and he added the stuff about Darrensburg. So this is a really good little book to get. It's small, it's not that much. And of course, if you want the actual land and transactions from UL, Glenn Conrad's books on the German coast and the 2 parishes of all the abstracts. Okay, and then of course, if you're not a member of our organization, the German Acadian Coast Historical and Genealogical Society, we have a website, and of course we do lots of fun things that you can join with us and learn more about your ancestors. So I hope that was a very quick and fast overview of everything. We have our Oktoberfest luncheon every fall, so that's another one of our activities. Okay, thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. I think we've got it worked out. So the second part of our presentation today, we will have Robert Freeland, Vice President of the Friends of the Cabildo, the volunteer organization of the Louisiana State Museum. Robert is also past governor of the La Louisiana
Granadeiros e Damas de Galvez.
He says it so much better than I do. Robert's presentation will be Galvez and his Louisiana Revolutionary Soldiers. After the presentation is over, we will have another question and answer session. Thank you. Thank you.
So I still need this? Okay. So yes, good. Buenos dias. Everybody, you all are part of Spain. Okay. Can I lower it or I have to keep it far? Normally I'm always told that I have to put it closer to my mouth. This one's a good one, right? Everybody can hear now? So, as we saw today, there was a period we were part of Spain. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to discuss the importance of Spain in Louisiana, in the role in the American Revolution, in Spanish colonial Louisiana. So as tour guides, I'm a volunteer tour guide for the museum. We were indigenous, we were Spanish, we became French, we were Spanish again, we became French again, we became American. And this period of the Spanish period is the second one. This is the important one. And it tends to be forgotten in general in Louisiana history. Outsiders don't even know we were Spanish. You guys from Louisiana, you know a little bit, and I'm going to try to fill many of the gaps. Spain and Louisiana supported the American Revolution. We weren't one of the 13 colonies, but in many ways, without Louisiana, a lot wouldn't have happened. And I'll give you an example of the size of the program. There was a battle during the American Revolution fought on Louisiana. What is the name of that battle? Everybody out loud at the same time. What day was it? You don't know. Imagine that. September 21st, 1779, in Louisiana, every year we must celebrate that date. And this audience forgot it. That's what we're going to be working on. So I am going to talk about the Galvez legacy and the other thing. Sorry, thank you. This is what I hope to be merely the first of many presentations and meetings on this subject together with the organizations that I represent. Okay, so I am with the Louisiana State Museum. A couple of years ago, we hosted an exhibit called Recovered Memories, the support of Louisiana and Spain in the American Revolution. Not rewritten history, recovered memories. We all knew this, but we forgot about Spain's participation. And 5 years ago, we created an organization that is completing 50 years this year in Louisiana. It's the Granaderos y Damas de Galvez. And it's the Granaderos y Damas because the Granaderos are the grenadiers. They threw grenades, not in the way we think of. And one time a Spanish-speaking person said, no, you don't speak Spanish right. It's ganaderos, which means cattlemen. And I didn't want to argue, but it's grenadiers, granaderos, because they threw the grenades. And when the organization was founded 50 years ago, it was granaderos only. But over time, many more women joined. And so we're not genealogical based. You become a member, it's open. We added idamas, which means the grenadiers and women of Galvez. The other thing is, I'm a Tulane alum. My specialty is Latin America. I lived in many different countries in Latin America, so I know the overall America's history of Spain in a different way. My mother's Brazilian, my father's an American. My Brazilian grandfather was Scottish. Spain was my enemy all my life. Portugal, the US, I lived in Latin America, all fought against Spain, and when I come to New Orleans, I realized Spain wasn't that bad. And the museum asked me, because I spoke Spanish, to become Bernardo de Galvez for fundraisers and living history programs. And what they told me on my first day as a volunteer, no one wants to be Spaniards, they all want to be Frenchmen and Americans. I'm beginning my career, I began the process, and I've learned a lot with it. I am also Vice Chair of the Louisiana America 250 Commission. DAR is way ahead of the curve. They have joined with America 250 issues from the beginning. Everybody says, oh, it happens next year, July 4th. No, it started in 2022, we're late. Because what we're talking about today is sowing the seeds to create a program for 2026. And we're gonna make lots of mistakes in between then. And I'm going to end my presentation with ways to work together. The present governor of the Granaderos y Damas de Galvez, Anne Bergeron, her focus, and she keeps on saying it, is 2029, for the 250 years of the Battle of Baton Rouge. So all of us committed to this Galvez story, everybody in this room one way or another, we're beginning to work towards not only 2026, but whatever mistakes we make, whatever additions we can make, we still have a couple of years to go. I'm going to talk about books to read. Recovered Memories was the exhibit that came to the museum in 2018. I speak Spanish. The Spanish historians utilized myself and a couple of others to help translate and train the docents. They changed the way we look at the Galvez period, and I'm trying to transmit that sequence and those priorities in my presentation. So in Louisiana, we tend to focus what we did over here. Americans tend to focus on the 13 colonies. And the top book up there, I can use this. Bernardo de Galvez, so I'm gonna recommend sequence to read. This book was written in the 1930s. It's still the best single book on Galvez. This book, and I got different features, has a different story. Larry Powell's Accidental City. If you have that in your bookshelf, he talks about the French period, the Spanish period. If you buy it, don't get bored trying to read the first part, just go straight to the Spanish period, because he covers it in such a way that if you're a Latin Americanist, you learn how Louisiana was part of that story. So, these are other books on the Galvez story. One of you mentioned to me today that you had been at the HNOC a couple of years ago. Gonzalo Quintero was a speaker there. He's a Spaniard. This is translated to English. You have Thomas Chavez wrote a book. And then more recently, very important, and some of the images I have in this presentation are from Stephen Kling, and that's why I couldn't share the whole presentation. I have authorization to use it for sessions like this. He's from St. Louis. I'm going to talk about the Regiment of Louisiana. It fought as far north as Chicago. It defended St. Louis. The regiment, Galvez didn't make it there himself, but many of you might have had ancestors that actually fought outside of Louisiana, and that's the size of the information that's coming out on the Galvez story as we speak. There is a book from a Texan, Judge Ed Butler. It's not as good as Cowie's, but he has new information and he has a lot of indices, annexes and all that. To me, my recommendation to you is get the Cowie book, 1935, get the Butler book, and between the two, you'll have a good feel for the Galvez story. If you want to learn more about the Spanish specifically, this book was written by a departing consul of Spain who was frustrated that in Louisiana nobody remembers their Spanish heritage, and you can feel his frustration in the way he writes. So it's not a historian's book, it's the view of a Spanish consul. And then a historian's book, Gilbert Din is the maximum of the historians on the Isleños, very similar to what Mr. Scheck-Snyder talked to us about the way the immigration occurred with these different groups. And we do have Ben, where's Ben Crow? Ben Crow is a past president of the Canary Island Association. He and I have partnered with many programs, and I'm going to tell you some of the stories. That's a good book on the Canary Islanders. And as Mr. Scheck-Snyder showed the ships that the Germanic people came on, Gilbert then tells you the same ships that brought the Canary Islanders. That's right, this doesn't work. How many of you have read this book? You all are Spanish Louisianians. You all are French Louisianians. This is a must read. This book came out in 2014, and it talks about the way the two countries helped the United States. And are you here because you're a French descendant, a Germanic descendant? Oh, I don't have any Spanish in me, but you fought under Galvez, a Spaniard. So you should learn the history of all three. And what the Spaniards taught us is, at the beginning of the 1700s, there are three countries, at least on our side of the world, that are maximum importance. Spain is beginning its long decline. Up until 1700, it was the most powerful country. France is at its peak under Louis XIV, and England was a little backwater in the 1500s, 1600s, but by 1700, it is becoming a contender. And if you look over here, the War of Spanish Succession, we were involved because Iberville, our founder, died during that war. The 7 Years' War, we go from France to Spain. American independence, we were part of it. And the Napoleonic Wars, Spain and England are allied against France, and we defeat the British at the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. It's part of this story as well, and Louisiana is part of it all the way. Sorry. So that's the War of Spanish Succession. You can see the map here. Blue is Portugal and England and its allies against the green, which is Spain and France and their allies. The Pacte de Famille is signed between the Bourbon kings. So we're separate countries, but we have the same family. And we tour guides, like Ben and I are tour guides for the museum, we have to tell people, no, Bourbon Street isn't because of all the bars, it's because of our royal families. And they sign an agreement, your enemy is my enemy when we fight together. Brothers at Arms will explain in much more detail the deal between the two countries. After the 7 Years' War, a couple of things happen. France loses Canada, Louisiana. That we're part of that. 2, Spain loses Florida. Why did they lose Florida? Because they had lost Cuba. The British took Cuba. Little island in the Caribbean, but strategically super important. And so what the Spanish do is, we'll give you Florida. You now have Canada, 13 colonies in Florida, and you give us Cuba back. Now what the British were doing, if you look here at Central America, Britain took, not normally part of the big story that we talk about in Louisiana, we don't talk about this 13 colonies. Britain starts taking from Jamaica, their key outpost in the Caribbean, they take parts of Central America. The British strategy was, we take Central America, we'll take Cuba again, and anytime the treasure fleets leave the Virreinato de Nueva España, or they come from South America, we're going to capture those ships. Now, Mr. Schexnayder mentioned a man named Ulloa. And what did he say? We got rid of that Spanish. Did he get punished? No, he became the commander-in-chief of Spain Navy. And he is part of the American Revolution story, but from a different angle, not from when he was Louisiana, but later on. And that shows you how interconnected we are in all this story. Sorry. So Charles III is our king when we become Spanish. Carlos III is the best of the Bourbon kings of Spain. He introduced what is known as the Bourbon reforms. He reorganizes the Spanish way of doing things. And St. Charles Avenue in New Orleans is named in his honor. And nobody knows which King Charles or why Charles, St. Charles Avenue has that name. We are plugged into the Virreinato de Nueva España, the Viceroyalty of New Spain. As we can see here, it goes from the Philippines all the way into the Caribbean. Spain acquired us in a transfer. It was not a war. They did not come in here to kill all the French that kicked out Ulloa. They came in here realizing, and I'm now telling it from the Spanish point of view, not the French that we got rid of the Spaniard. They realized that they had to adjust this new territory into their way of doing business. And what Mr. Schexnayder alluded to was Ulloa came in with the old system that the Spanish had. O'Reilly realized, I have to change, otherwise these people are going to continue upset. And they did adjust accordingly as time went on. Many of the Spanish governors married French girls. They became integrated into society. Almost all of them were promoted elsewhere in the Spanish government. So how does Spain contribute to Louisiana? They brought European whites from Spain, the Canary Islands. Many of the Cajuns come to Louisiana as part of a strategy of colonization during this period. You all eat jambalaya? That's Spanish food, that's not French food. And I use this when I talk to the kids and all that. What makes jambalaya Louisianian and not Spanish? Well, the Spanish are rich, they have saffron. Have any of you ever bought saffron at the supermarket? Little bit in the bottle, it's like 12 bucks. So we got rid of the saffron, we were poor. What did we put in it? Tabasco. We got that from Mexico. So jambalaya is not French, it's a mixture of Louisiana, Mexico, and Spain. Paella is the traditional dish. Did I say paella or? Okay, paella is the traditional dish that, and we brought Africans, as enslaved Africans, from different parts of Africa. So in the French period, they were Senegambians, Wolof, Bambaras. Spain comes in, they don't have colonies in Africa. They allow the Portuguese and British to bring in slaves from their colonies. So our African mix in Louisiana is very different. Because of that, a lot of the music, and the slave, Mr. Schexnayder alluded to the Code Noir, which is the French way of handling race relations. The Americans followed the British system, which was very restrictive. And Mr. Schexnayder's presentation, he did talk about the free people of color. What is a free person of color? Well, in the rest of the South, I couldn't be free and remain in the city. I had to go somewhere else. In French Louisiana, the owner could free the slave with permission from the government. In Spanish Louisiana, it is my right as an enslaved person, because I am Catholic, anybody that's Catholic is a citizen, on Sundays I am free to go to church and to make money, because my owner does not own my soul. Temporarily, he owns my body. And with that money, an enslaved person could purchase their freedom, and that's known as coartación. The other thing is, you're going to read Galvez stories, and he attacks Mobile, and he has 25 enslaved Africans fighting for him. Now, obviously they had the grunt work and the bad thing, but they were trained in shooting. Many of those, for being brave in battle, were freed. And so the Spanish system was a lot different. With the Native Americans as well, if you're Catholic, you're a citizen. And now I'm defending Spain with you French, Germans, and Americans. When did Native Americans in the United States become U.S. citizens? 19 what? Can you imagine? We talk nowadays, we took their land away. We didn't even let them be Americans until 101 years ago. And under the Spanish, you're Catholic, you're a citizen. You might be ranked different, but the Spanish system was a lot different. We're plugged in. We have audiencias, cabildos, governors. We're now waiting for war. The 7 Years' War is over, but we know it's going to keep on happening. Some of you mentioned militias. When Spain loses Cuba, they almost lost Puerto Rico, they lost other things. What they did, Alejandro O'Reilly, an Irishman, is brought back to the Americas, and in Puerto Rico and in Cuba, he changes the way Spain did business with those islands. In Louisiana, he introduces the fixed militia. And what is different about the Minutemen, who are ready at a moment's notice, right? Hector Heathcote and all those as kids growing up, you get your gun, you go out and fight the British, but you're in your own area. The Spanish created a fixed discipline militia, and you participated in maneuvers with the Regiment of Louisiana. You were highly trained. Now, how many of you are older than 15 but younger than 50? Not in this, couple of you. Sheck Snyder, maybe one or two. You, what's your name? Okay. Those would have had to serve in the militia. The rest of us, we were exempt. But everybody served in the militia. This is from Stephen Kling's book. And this is one of those things I have to only use. And New Orleans is Spain. Covington is England. West Baton Rouge is Spain. East Baton Rouge is England. So the borders in Paris, London, Madrid, and Philadelphia are theoretical. None of those cities are close to the enemy. In Louisiana, we're at ground zero. It was a world war. It wasn't just the 13 colonies. These are the kings. You all know about George III and Louis XVI helped us. None of you imagine that Charles III, and that's what we're trying to change. Spanish diplomats were very important in the story. The funders. Americans know of Robert Morris from Philadelphia. They don't really know about the Count of Aranda in Spain and France. Many of you in this audience do know about Oliver Pollock. These were the three greatest funders, one a Spaniard, one an American, one an Irishman serving under Spain. Pollock lives in New Orleans, and when he corresponds with these other men, he creates the $sign. And so New Orleans gets credit for creating the $sign because the piece of 8 has the Pillars of Hercules. There are sashes on the coin. And Oliver at this time is dealing with all these countries. The weight of many coins was the same, so that was the way it was translated. Sorry. He supplies guns as far north as Fort Pitt, which is today Pittsburgh, to George Rogers Clark, who frees Indiana, Kentucky, Illinois from the British. These are two major battles. Now look at the dates, 1778, 1779. We are not at war yet in Louisiana, but we know it's coming. There is a fourth front beyond Louisiana, and that's the Texans. And so Texas is joining the 13 colonies by saying they helped Louisiana and Galvez. The British used Native Americans to attack Texas and Louisiana. A lot of the Gulf Coast shipping came from Mexico and Texas. The cattle drives, And then many DAR and SAR chapters are increasing their membership by tracing who donated. They're called the donativos, who donated to the cause. And in Spain at the same time, they were looking for money. And one of the most famous cases, all of you here, when you go to Spain, do me a favor, and I have one friend that I keep on chewing him out and he keeps on doing it al contrario. You must go as Louisianians to where you were settled. So you should go to the Canary Islands, you should go to Malaga, you should go visit Macharaviaya, the city where Galvez was born. And Malaga, in this period, they were building their cathedral. And they came to the parishioners and says, do we complete the second spire or do we send the money to Bernardo to fight the British? And the parishioners voted to send the money to Louisiana. They never built the second spire. And so if you go to Malaga, visit the cathedral, tell them you're from New Orleans, and they'll probably get a kick out of telling you their side of the story of how they support it. And if they don't know, then you tell them the other side of the story. For the Granaderos, I am here today empowering all of you to tell the Galvez story, whatever organization you're with. 3 months ago, this book came out. Nosotros, los Galvez de Macharaviaya. Bernardo is not high nobility. His family were landowners. They're beginning to rise in the 1700s. This is King Carlos III. Matias de Galvez is Bernardo's father. Antonio de Galvez, these guys are beginning to be known to the nobility of Spain, but they're not nobility yet. So Matias and his brothers, they write documents. All of you DAR, SAR, you're into genealogy. They begin the genealogy of their family. This is the book. They barely mention Bernardo de Galvez. After all, he's only one of the many Galvez that made the family great. And this is the one that did the most. Jose de Galvez is the second brother. He's born in Macharaviaya. His mother encouraged, she knows he's smart, you gotta get educated. She dies at an early age. The priests want him to be a priest. He's super intelligent. He ends up being a lawyer. He is named Visitador of New Spain. It is said that because he married a French woman, and he was a lawyer, well known, the French government hired him in court to fight the Spanish government. He beat his own country, the Spanish, and it is said that Charles III says, you're a Spaniard, why did you act against your country? And the answer apparently is, the law comes first, the king second. I had to do my duty. It is said that the king liked him so much, he made him the visitador. And so in that previous slide, the colonial administration was very regimented, very set. Galvez's uncle, Jose, is sent to change everything. As a visitador, he had power over everybody. And he creates a school in Escuelas de Banco Agrícola, but it was more like he made all of you guys, you're gonna make a donation today, and with this money, we're gonna educate the kids of the river parishes, the German coast. And we're gonna make sure that they're the best ones in tourism, in the port, in river, in agriculture. And what he does is he forces everybody in his region to invest, and these are the ones they bring into the Americas. And that's the power of the Galvez family. So, Matias is the brother. He arrives in Tenerife in 1757. Galvez is 11 years old at this time, our Bernardo. He serves in various positions, and in 1778, he is sent to Guatemala. In Guatemala, when the British finally attacked during the American Revolution, to implement that strategy of separating the Spanish Americas in two, Matias de Galvez, general, defeats the British in Central America in the southern Gulf of Mexico. I'm going to tell how his son did it in the northern part. Bernardo. He was born in Macharaviaya. He goes to Tenerife at 11. He lives there for 5 years as a kid. We know from historians and letters and all that that he maintained relations with these guys. So one of the things, Ben Crow represents the Canary Islanders here, these weren't poor, the first ones that came in that I'm talking about weren't poor immigrants looking for better life. They were handpicked by Matias to come serve in the Regiment of Louisiana in Louisiana. They were documented, they were recruited. We know exactly, as Mr. Scheck-Snyder showed the ships, we know what ships they came on. Jose de Galvez takes Bernardo at the age of 15, takes him everywhere. So Bernardo at 15 is learning the way his uncle does things. This is Gilbert Dinn's book on the Cabildo. It's an org chart. Bernardo de Galvez reports to the Captain General in Cuba, who reports to Matias, who reports to Jose, who reports to the king. Nepotism of the best kind, because these were the best people Spain had to send. And so the Spanish system at that time, you could have nepotism. But the other thing is, as a colony, we were a backwater. Under the Spanish, strategically, this was one of the most important colonies they had. They had the best person handling Louisiana. This is a sad story. Bernardo marries Marie Félicité Saint Maxim Destrehan. None of the history books talk about women back then. That is a project for us in today's new world with women's studies. What were Spanish Louisiana women doing? And there is no history of her. Both of these books are historical fiction. So we know that she was a young girl born in New Orleans. She married, not the Destrehan owner, but the brother of the Destrehan owner. He dies. Galvez arrives in 77. They fall in love. She must have been a beautiful girl. Everything says that. And at that time, for a man of his power to be married, he had to have permission from the king. There was one loophole. And they needed this loophole, and you'll see why. If Bernardo was to die, you could fast track the marriage with the permission from the church, and the priest could marry Bernardo. So Bernardo and Marie Félicité married. Not 9 months later, a couple of months later, she had a baby. So now we know why the marriage was fast tracked. They didn't wait to be married to fall in love and have children. And that's the type of woman this lady was. Second child, and this I can't prove. Galvez wins the Battle of Pensacola in May of '81. 9 months later, the Spanish are getting ready to take Jamaica. Remember that strategic, the British used Jamaica, let's take away Jamaica, and they have no more power in the Caribbean. Marie Félicité gives birth 9 months after the Battle of Pensacola in Haiti, where Bernardo was preparing to take Jamaica. Now, count the dates. Was she with him in Pensacola? They consummated the birth of their child. She was in Haiti. She wasn't in New Orleans when she gave birth. What was this woman doing with her husband? As Americans, we know of Clara Barton in the American Civil War, Florence Nightingale in the Crimean War. So women were nurses in modern history. She must have been doing something like that. Nobody knows. All the history books talk about what the men were doing. So that's a big project that we can talk about. And she was Destrehan, so that's connected. Sorry. His troops, the Regiment of Louisiana was 700 troops, Peninsulares from the peninsula. The king knows war is going to happen. They authorize a 2nd Battalion of the Regiment of Louisiana. And this is in 1779. So America declares independence in 76. France joins the American side in 78. Here we are in 79. We know how many of them came when they came. Matias is transferred. There was a gentleman that replaced him that kept everything back on track. The local Cabildo did not want Bernardo to get these 700 because they were the best men. By the time they're ready, there's actually 2,300 and some because many of them were married. As Mr. Scheck-Snyder said, different ships had different routes. The same thing with the Canary Islanders. There's a lot of similarities. In July of '79, Galvez makes a report that he had 1,582 people living. 150 of them are single. You serve in the regiment. The remaining 550, you have a family, we're going to give you land, and you must serve in the militia. Not Minutemen militia, the fixed discipline militia. Now, the Cajuns are here. New Iberia is founded with people from Ayaurín de la Torre in Malaga. These islanders, they all hate Britain equally. All of them are committed. There was no reluctance. And so that is the story. Now, the other interesting thing that we're beginning to look at is how did he replace the 550 with people from Mexico and Cuba? In the history books, they're Spaniards. And I know that the DAR is working to get records on the Cubans, because that's an opportunity for the DAR to expand into Cuba. Unfortunately, the two countries don't do business with one another now, but it's a question of time. And when we finally open the relations, the best way to do it is show that we Cubans were there at the beginning of the birth through the DAR and SAR. So we're waiting for that to happen. The Canary Islands are placed downriver from New Orleans and downriver from Baton Rouge, because all of this is Spain, all of this is England. The Treaty of Aranjuez is signed in April of '79. This is part of the Family Pact. Spain now can attack England. France can now support George Washington with its navy, because the Spanish Navy will cover for the French Navy on their islands. And this is a timeline that this group is super, super important for these organizations that I represent. The Marcha de Galvez is a concept. It's the March of Galvez. There's a mural in Baton Rouge called the Marcha de Galvez. In 1976, there was a book called the Marcha de Galvez. So let's do it in Spanish, not French, not English. And this timeline, you can add to it, you can change things. July 7th, 1779, Galvez reports the Canary Islanders. A couple of days later, he receives notification. He knows it's going to happen, but now officially, war is declared. Some of the people, no, let's wait until Spain sends us more before we attack the British. Galvez is brave. We are going to attack now. They have not received the notification. This is the moment for us to go. And on August 27th, he begins the March of Galvez. For the Granaderos, this year is our 5th Marcha de Galvez series of events. What we imagine, and we did it last year, we started August 27th at the Canary Island Museum, not New Orleans. We went a little bit downriver. So symbolically, all of us can put together a program coming up, and then look at all the people that served under Galvez, all of these groups. The German coast had a militia. How many of you are descendants of that German coast? I don't know. I'm not an expert, but if we could find those militia patriots, you're part of this bigger story. The three parishes you, DAR, represent are part of that, and the rest of the organizations that you all have invited today to this event is fantastic. September 7th, he takes Fort Butte. September 10th, the Battle of Lake Pontchartrain. September 21st, he defeats the British in Baton Rouge. And there's different dates for when the British actually leave. The plaque in Mandeville says October 16th, but these are technically the cities that the British had on the north shore of Lake Pontchartrain. Britain and Galvez signed different treaties. All of this is part of the bigger Marcha de Galvez. We always talk about this. This painting is in a private collection now. It was painted for the exhibit. Galvez, the flags of the United States and Spain, because Oliver Pollock and 7 others were here. White man in a blue and white uniform, Regiment of Louisiana. Black man, red and white. He was the Regiment of Louisiana black troops. You have a white man in brown and white. He was one of the militias. Black man in blue and brown. He was one of the Free People of Color militias. Are these Choctaw? Are they Homa? We don't know, but all of these were part of the Galvez, March of the Galvez Rise. This is Fort Butte from Stephen Kling. The battle, I've been doing this presentation on the Galvez, on the Rousseau story different times. And the Battle of Fort Lake Pontchartrain is how I call it, because the plaque says Battle of Lake Pontchartrain, and it was 2 ships. But as you can see, it was a 3-year war of attrition on Lake Pontchartrain. It wasn't one battle. And I'm not going to go into detail in this presentation. And the plaque talks about Pickles, the Englishman who became an American. They don't talk about Pierre Georges Rousseau, was a Frenchman, grew up in South Carolina, came to Louisiana. And we know that he was here when he was 14 in the early Spanish period. And so there is an SAR chapter called the Rousseau chapter on the North Shore. I'm working with them to build up the name of this patriot. This is from Stephen Kling's book. Plus he created a game for school kids. It's not video, but a lot of schools do have the war game nerds and board game nerds. If one of your schools in the 3 Parish region is interested, we can supply this. All of you have been here before, right? That's Capitol Park. Galvez is attacking the Pentagon barracks. He sets the cannons over here, actually a little bit further down, and he suckers the British into thinking he's going to attack from there. Again, look at the strategy of this man. So the British point the guns this way. On the morning of the 21st, Galvez starts firing. Too late for the British to turn the cannons around. They surrender. We take Baton Rouge. Oh, just a few guys died. Doesn't matter. It's like Andrew Jackson at the Battle of New Orleans. Oh, it didn't count. Not too many people died. No, no, no. Once those 2 battles are won by those 2 men, everything changes. So that's the Battle of Baton Rouge. And I could do a whole hour presentation. He continues with his regiment to Mobile and Pensacola. Mobile has a Galvez statue. They don't even know why it's there. That's something I'm working for the Granaderos, is to create a they put it up in the 1970s. Things fall apart. No one knows why it's there. I've committed to go help the Granaderos expand. I've got people from the SAR and DAR that have helped. The Battle of Pensacola is the biggest of the battles. And here's the saddest thing I can say to you Louisianians. In 2014, Bernardo de Galvez was made an honorary citizen. It had been promised by the Continental Congress in Washington back in the 1780s, never done. 2014, it was done. Floridians, Texans, and a Spanish senator are the ones that wrote the law, as far as I can tell. The United States Congress adopted it. One Louisiana congressman only, Charles Boustany from Lake Charles area. 25 Floridians, 2 Texans, 1 Alabamian. And they threw this part as a joke that Galvez seized the port of New Orleans, thinking that a Louisiana congressman would have picked up on it. But because in Louisiana we don't know who Galvez was, we were never Spanish, we were only French, this now is in the law and you can't change the law. And that to me is the worst, that's the tip of the iceberg of what we have to do to really overcome the rest of the story. This is the United States. Galvez gets promoted. With my school programs for the Friends, I talk about this. If you do 5th grade, 6th grade, 4th grade, the teachers teach art, music, and all that. Some of the art teachers have asked the kids to create your own coat of arms telling your family story. And that's the way we can use the Galvez story in schools in the art class. If I go to the Louisiana history, oh no, we were never Spanish, I'm not going to teach that. If I go through the art class, if I go through the Spanish class, I'm inside the school. Galvez is promoted. How many of you have seen this portrait? Where is the closest location of this portrait? Right over there. Luckily, I was trained by the Spanish art historians. Did you go read the letter? You just looked at it and said that he has a letter in his hand. Well, here's the letter. Querido hijo Bernardo, dear son Bernardo, congratulations on your victories. Don't let them go to your head. After all, you owe your success to King and God who provided you with the resources. And when I'm doing kids, what are the big problems? Having kids pay attention to their elders. Here's this man at the top of his career, and his father's still telling him what to do. Isn't that a beautiful story? And it's true. And no one knows about that letter. So I had told you all that some of this, your chapter will get later. He becomes viceroy. There are Galvez organizations. Here we have members of the Granaderos that actually dress up in period costume. Anne Bergeron's husband, Paul, is a member of the Regiment of Louisiana Reenactors. So she goes to all of these events. Paul's dressed up as a private. So what she did, she designed the outfit of a peasant woman, Cajun woman that would have married a Spanish official. So the SAR color guard, all of these guys are SAR. They served the SAR color guard with their Regiment of Louisiana uniforms. Regiment of Louisiana, Regiment of Louisiana, Regiment of Louisiana, the artillery of the Regiment of Louisiana. So this gentleman, Gary Phillips, is from Houma. His wife, Connie Gaines, a member of the DAR, she's a descendant of the Houma that fought. She dresses up as a Houma woman integrated into society would have. And that's what we do in the Granaderos, is we merge the women and the men, whereas SAR, DAR, you're separate, but you do get together on events. We, the Granaderos, we work with many of you. We, the Friends of the Cabildo in Louisiana State Museum, have certain level of relations with the Spirit of 76. We just finished an event on Thursday, or actually yesterday, in Capitol Park Museum with the John James Audubon chapter. We, the museum, want relations with all your chapters throughout the state. There's so much we can do. The museum, Galvez Museum in Macharaviaya, and then the Louisiana State Museum has a role in the existence of many of the daughters and sons of the American Revolution. 1902, William McKinley visits Louisiana. Up until then, we didn't have a Secret Service. Who protected the president? The members of the Grand Old Army. Now, I'm in Louisiana. Can you imagine the havoc I would create by having members of the Grand Old Army, not the Confederate sons of the, right? So the solution was, let's be impartial and let's get the SAR to join. And the SAR guys will become the bodyguard of the President of the United States. What that does, a whole bunch of Creoles say, but my ancestor fought for Galvez. Why can't we join the SAR? There was an SAR group, there was a DARU. And so about 1920, the DAR and SAR recognizes descendants of the troops that fought under Galvez in Louisiana to join this prestigious organization. So I'm combining here, many of you are DAR, SAR. My museum was also involved in that transition. So it's very fitting, and the Spirit of 76 does have a plaque on Galvez at the front, and they're participating in our upcoming Lafayette exhibit. So in 2018, when the exhibit came to New Orleans, we created the Spanish Heritage Field Trip Program. Bill Highland, Canary Island, St. Bernard historian, Jason Strata and I created the program in 2015, and we decided, not tongue-in-cheek, but very serious, it's not the Hispanic program. Hispanic is someone that crossed the Rio Grande after we were a country. We Spaniards in New Orleans, we were here before you Americans. So it is our Spanish heritage that we are honoring. We can honor Hispanics, but that is the essence of the program. is New Orleans was part of Spain, and we did a lot during those periods. I've got to change this. This is, we're in our 8th year now. We don't teach Spanish, we provide cultural and historical relevance. I go to a school, and I want to go talk about Galvez and the American Revolution to the history department. They say, no, we weren't Spanish. I go to the Spanish teacher. Yes, I'm interested. I'm inside the school. The history teacher says, oh, I want to learn more about that because that's Louisiana history that I didn't know about. So every school, there are different ways of getting in. And I have partnered with the Spanish Ministry of Education, the Mexican Consulate, and the Granaderos y Damas de Galvez for this program. We focus on 5 areas, and this is where I'm ending my presentation, and I'm no longer in the past, I'm in the future. The museum will have a Lafayette exhibit coming up April 9th. Many of you, DAR, know about this. It's going to be followed with something related to Galvez. We don't know yet. But I have an opportunity with, and people, I speak Spanish, created the Spanish Heritage Program, and they say, well, why don't you do a French Heritage? I don't speak French, and to make it really great, someone has to speak, because I take the kids through the museum speaking in Spanish, right? Or I say, does anybody speak Spanish in this audience? Imagine, that's the size of my problem. How do you say screen in Spanish? How do you say laptop in Spanish? So I can take you guys and do a mini tour right now and have you learn. So I'll show you what I'm gonna have to do. Let's repeat the name of my organization is Galvez. Granaderos. So now you learned a new word in Spanish, grenadier. And that's how I do it with the kids. Now, if the teacher says, I want everything done in Spanish, we do it in Spanish. So we have an opportunity through strategic partnerships to really push forward. We in this audience, not just we, the friends of the Cabildo. So if we partner with the Department of Education, History, Social Studies, Language, local school boards, charter schools, archdioceses, libraries, and teachers associations. I work closely, and I'm here today, not in Natchitoches. Today is the Louisiana Foreign Language Teachers Association annual meeting. I had to pick and choose what I could do. In the long run, I need that group, but this here was very important to us. They have 125 teachers, all volunteer driven. Some are university, some are public, some are private. I also partner with the Department of Education. They have a world languages unit. 300 foreign language teachers in public schools in the state of Louisiana. Through Codefil and other organizations, about 2/3 of the money invested in that language, and this is not exact, goes for French, about 1/3 Spanish, but 2/3 of the kids in Louisiana are learning Spanish, not French. Don't take away from one and add to the other. Let's build up both. Mr. Scheck-Snyder alluded to the 1921 law, prohibited in Louisiana to teach a foreign language in the schools. From that moment on, every Cajun was chastised and punished in their schools. In Northwest Louisiana, they learned Spanish. They were prohibited from speaking Spanish. The Isleños spoke Spanish, prohibited. The Germans, and what that does, and now I'm preaching and I apologize, but it's part of it. A year ago, I did a present, 9 months ago, at Southeastern. 70 kids, and I talked to them, and none of them are studying business. And I said, how come there's no business majors here? Oh, the business school got rid of the language requirement. What that means to me, I worked for American Express for 30 years in 9 cities and 7 countries. You have just eliminated Louisianians from getting jobs in multinationals that do business all over the world, because we're not preparing the kids to go overseas. The other thing, what is the most important industry in New Orleans? Tourism. Because we don't have people that speak languages, I can charge $75 to $100 an hour as a tour guide, whereas if you only speak English, it's going to be $25. I don't work for money anymore, so, but we're losing opportunities as a state, and the Galvez story is a nice way to tie in. The Lafayette story coming up is a good story to reinforce French in Louisiana. So we have two big individuals, the DAR, SAR, Granaderos y Damas de Galvez, Friends of the Cabildo, the Islengos, we're committed to anyway. Let's take these exhibits and really make the most of them in the school system. This is what I just talked about. The Queen Mother created an institute called the Queen Sophia. King Juan Carlos abdicated, his son Ferdinand is the King of Spain. The Queen Mother created an organization. They want to come to Louisiana Tuesday. What's happening Tuesday? I'm hoping they don't cancel, because there's so much we can do. The Spanish Ministry of Education is committed. Lafayette exhibit that's coming, they all have a problem for me. I create lesson plans for Spanish teachers. I include Galvez. I educate, I meet, that's what I would have done in Natchitoches. The Lafayette people and the Queen Sophia said, oh, we have lesson plans on our website. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go to the website and try to read a lesson plan? You wrote an outline, but you didn't train me in what the details are. You're going to force me to go to the library and read up on Galvez and Lafayette? So my proposal to us in this group is, let's work, and I'll do this for the Friends of the Cabildo because I have to do this, is I'm going to take the Spanish version of the American Revolution, the French-American Lafayette, and I will work through the language. I can't go to the history departments because that's too much. But once I start French and Spanish through LFTLA and the Louisiana Consortium, I'm going to come back to this audience and say, any foreign language teacher in the 3 parishes you cover, let's work together and let's get them involved in this story. Let me show you how we're going to do it. September 21st is the Battle of Baton Rouge. September 15th is Hispanic Heritage Month. I will play off Hispanic when I have to. Why the 15th? Mexico and Central America declare independence on September 15th. Why does it end October 15th? Because Spain's National Day is October 12th. In politically correct America of today, October 12th is a nasty day because that's when Columbus came and killed all the Indians, and let's tear down statues on the 12th. But for us in Louisiana, founded by the Spanish, what is the most important date to France? Anybody? Bastille Day. You all know that one, 14th of July. But let's start celebrating October 12th as Spain's National Day. I tack it into Hispanic Heritage Month. I get the young Hispanics and I get the old people like you guys that forgot your Spanish heritage. It's all part of 1 month's promotion. And so the kids are getting back to school August 15th. September 15th, teachers, not all schools kick it off. Most Spanish teachers do. Hispanic Heritage Month. 6 days later, we can talk about the Battle of Baton Rouge. So, this is my timeline. I'm in my 4th year doing this. In February, I have to solicit partnerships for the museum. Thank you for inviting me now in January. I'm 1 month ahead. I have to tell the Department of Education what I'm going to be doing. I have to get all the key partners committed. The teachers, May 15th, they're done with school. They disappear for a whole semester, for a whole summer. We have to tell them in May, we have this program for September. If you miss these dates, you miss a whole school year. I'm not going one school, one school, one school. I'm trying to get the whole education process in the state of Louisiana on board. As a museum, this is perfect for us. When do museums get most of the field trips? April and March and April, because the teachers, the principal says we're doing paperwork, send them to the, no, So the museum fills up with school kids. If we can do a program in October, the low season in the museums will pay all the attention in the world that you need for these kids. So now we have to go to those Lafayette and Queen Sofia Institute lesson plans, and that's when we're going to train the teachers. So I can bring them to the Cabildo, or we can all partner together and bring them to Destrehan Plantation. Brenda Benoit is not here today, right? So Ben Crow got me involved in the Destrehan Plantation's Heritage Day. That's a perfect venue to get teachers, just the 3 parishes. I'm going to sell them on Galvez, you're going to talk about DAR, SAR, we're going to sell them on Lafayette. It's easy to do. I offer to help you all do it with these 3 parishes. If you don't accept, I have to do Orleans, Jefferson, East Baton Rouge. So that is how I spend my time. Because I'm going to bring them to either the Cabildo or the Capitol Park for a field trip where we're going to teach them American history. Sorry. I'm almost done, guys. This is an example. So these guys are SAR color guard for Louisiana. They're also Regiment of Louisiana. 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, it equals 3. 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 equals about 10. So the more of us that get together, the bigger impact we have. This is Sociedad Española, the vice president. This is Maria Page, the honorary consul of Spain. All of them are members of the Granaderos y Damas de Galvez at a museum discovery day in Baton Rouge or a field trip in the museum in New Orleans. I would love all of you to join us in promoting field trips to the museum. This is something one of our members of the Granaderos did in North Alabama. He partnered with a lady from the DAR that had worked in retail, knew how to decorate windows, decoration, and they put together a Bernardo de Galvez mini display in the local library. All these books was in his library. He donated them temporarily. She went out and she got a little fake cannon because he had a real cannonball. So this imagination comes not from above down. It was a DAR person, a Granadero SAR person got together in the local library and created a mini Galvez exhibit. So imagine what 2026 is going to look like. And if we include Anne Bergeron's push for 2029, imagine how Louisiana is going to know about the Galvez story. Thank you.